He bought a forgotten cabin to disappear from the world. Instead, he found a pregnant woman hiding from men who believed they could own her life. By sunset, guns would be drawn, secrets would surface, and one quiet valley would be forced to choose between fear and truth. He didn't come looking to be a hero. But sometimes, the hardest battles find the people who are just trying to survive. What happens next will make you believe in quiet miracles and second chances for the forgotten. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. If you believe no child or animal should ever face fear alone, hit subscribe now and share this story with someone who needs hope. Red Willow, Montana did not welcome strangers. It tolerated them at best, the way dry land tolerated rain, briefly, suspiciously, and always on its own terms. Summer had arrived early and hard that year. By mid-morning, the sun pressed down on the valley like a weight, bleaching color from the dirt road and pulling sharp resin scents from the pine trees. The heat carried no comfort, only endurance, and yet when night came, the air thinned and cooled, just enough to remind a man that the mountains never fully release their grip. Ethan Crowley entered Red Willow under that unforgiving summer sun, guiding his horse along the narrow road that cut through town. He was a man who looked older than his 38 years. Not from weakness, but from use. Tall, broad-shouldered, his build suggested years of physical labor rather than careful training. His face was lean, angular, framed by a short, uneven beard that he shaved when he remembered to. Dark hair lay flattened beneath a weathered hat, gray threading through it at the temples. His eyes, deep-set and dark, had the quiet watchfulness of someone who had learned the cost of distraction. He didn't slow as he passed the feed store, nor did he glance toward the saloon where laughter drifted lazily through open doors. Ethan had learned that towns like Red Willow offered curiosity before kindness, and neither interested him. He was not here to stay long among people. He was here for a cabin. 2 years earlier, his life had collapsed underground in a mine shaft several counties away. His son had gone to work early that morning, young and eager, promising to be home before dark. The collapse came without warning. The company called it an accident. Ethan had called it negligence. The truth, buried with the rubble, had never been fully uncovered. The payout had come quickly, almost insultingly so, as if speed might soften the loss. Ethan used the money to close debts and bury the past. What remained bought him a piece of land no one else wanted. The deed sat folded in the inside pocket of his vest, edges worn soft from being checked too often. It named him owner of a small cabin outside Red Willow, tucked deep into forested land near a creek. He had not seen it before purchasing. He had not asked questions. When a man had nothing left to lose, certainty became a luxury. The road narrowed as Ethan left town, turning into a winding trail that climbed steadily into the trees. The heat eased beneath the canopy, replaced by heavy stillness, broken only by cicadas and the rhythmic crunch of hooves on dirt. His horse, a bay gelding with a nervous eye and a habit of snorting at shadows, pulled unevenly, sweat darkening its flank. Ethan loosened the reins slightly, allowing the animal to find its pace. He had learned patience from animals better than from people. After nearly an hour, the trees parted enough for the cabin to come into view. It was smaller than he had imagined, built low and solid, logs, weathered gray by decades of sun and snow. The roof sloped unevenly, one corner sagging just enough to show its age. A narrow porch wrapped around the front, and beyond it ran Red Willow Creek, swollen with summer meltwater, its surface flashing in the sun as it rushed past stone and root alike. The place looked isolated, stubborn, and honest. Ethan felt something loosen in his chest. Then he saw the smoke. It rose steadily from the chimney, thin and unmistakable, curling into the bright sky. Ethan drew the reins tight, bringing the horse to an abrupt stop. The animal tossed its head in protest, but Ethan barely noticed. His focus narrowed, sharp and immediate. Someone was inside. Anger flared, quick and hot, followed by a colder, heavier realization. He had spent the last of his money on this place. There would be no second purchase, no backup plan. Whatever life remained to him had been tied to this cabin with ink and hope. He dismounted slowly, boots striking dry earth, and studied the structure more carefully. The porch boards were worn but intact. No signs of forced entry. No broken window. Whoever was inside had not broken in. They had settled in. Ethan stepped forward, every sense alert. He did not shout. He had learned that men who announced themselves often regretted it. His right hand rested near the worn leather holster at his hip, not gripping, but ready. The summer heat pressed against his back, sweat prickling under his collar. The door was closed but unlatched. He pushed it open. Warm air met him immediately, carrying the smell of wood smoke and fresh bread. The cabin interior was dim compared to the bright outdoors, but not neglected. Light filtered through a single window, illuminating a clean wooden table, a neatly folded quilt draped over a chair, and a kettle resting near the hearth. The space felt lived in, not temporarily occupied, but maintained. And then he saw her. She stood near the fireplace, posture straight, shoulders squared, as if she had been expecting him. She was young, likely in her mid-20s, with auburn hair braided over one shoulder, strands escaping to catch the light. Her skin was fair, lightly freckled, weathered by sun and wind rather than softened by ease. Her eyes were a striking green-gray, sharp and assessing, and when they met Ethan's gaze, they did not drop. She wore a simple blue dress, faded from washing, cinched at the waist with an apron dusted lightly with flour. The fabric hung loosely around her midsection, though Ethan did not yet understand why. Her hands were steady at her sides, fingers strong, nails short and clean. There was a faint bruise at her wrist, yellowed at the edges, nearly healed but not forgotten. For a long moment, neither spoke. "Morning?" she said finally. Her voice was calm, low, carrying no apology. "You must be Ethan Crowley." He paused just inside the doorway, the sun at his back. "That's right," he replied. He removed his hat without quite knowing. "Why?" "I bought this cabin." She nodded once, as if confirming something she already knew. "I know." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Then you know you shouldn't be here." "I know I can't stay forever," she said carefully, "but I can't leave today." Ethan studied her, his gaze sweeping the room again. There were no signs of other occupants, no men's boots, no extra bedrolls, just her, alone. "My name's Lydia Hale," she added. "I'm not here to take what's yours." "Then why are you here?" Ethan asked. Lydia hesitated. Her eyes shifted briefly toward the window, then back to him. The calm she had worn cracked just slightly, enough to reveal strain beneath it. "Because I don't have another place that hasn't been found," she said. Before Ethan could respond, a sound reached them both. Hoofbeats, distant at first, muffled by trees and uneven ground, but unmistakable. More than one horse, moving fast. Lydia went still. Color drained from her face, leaving her freckles stark against pale skin. She crossed the room quickly but carefully, positioning herself beside the window without fully exposing her silhouette. One hand pressed briefly to her lower abdomen before she caught herself and dropped it to her side. "How many people know you're here?" Ethan asked quietly. "Too many," she replied. The hoofbeats grew louder, closer. Leather creaked, metal clinked faintly. Spurs, buckles, weapons. Ethan felt the cabin shrink around them, its walls suddenly thin as paper. "You should go," Lydia said, her voice tight but controlled. "You don't owe me anything." Ethan didn't move. He looked at the bread cooling on the table, at the quilt folded with care, at the woman standing in his cabin with fear etched just beneath her composure. He thought of the mine, of the silence that followed the collapse, of how easy it was for powerful men to erase consequences. "What kind of men ride like that?" he asked. Lydia met his eyes. "The kind who believe they own what they chase." The horses stopped just outside the porch. Dust stirred. Shadows shifted across the floor as figures dismounted. Ethan's hand settled fully on the grip of his gun, not raised, not drawn, but ready. Outside, a boot struck the porch step, and then came the knock. The knock was not polite. It carried weight, the kind meant to announce authority rather than request entry. The door shuddered once in its frame, and the sound settled into the cabin like dust after a collapse. Ethan did not answer immediately. He stood still, feeling the heat of the day press through the walls and the faint, cool breath of the creek slipping in through the cracks, as if the land itself were undecided about what came next. Another knock followed, heavier than the first. "Lydia!" a man's voice called from the porch. It was deep, controlled, and unhurried, shaped by years of being obeyed. "We know you're in there." Lydia's shoulders tightened, but she did not retreat. She stayed where she was, one hand resting lightly on the table's edge, grounding herself. Ethan noticed the way she kept her breathing measured, as if panic were a luxury she could not afford. He stepped forward, placing himself between her and the door, not out of bravado, but because the space seemed to require it. "I'll handle this," he said quietly. Lydia's eyes searched his face. "You don't have to." "I know," Ethan replied, and meant it. He opened the door. 3 men stood on the porch, horses tied loosely to the rail behind them. The lead rider was a tall man in his early 40s, broad through the chest, with a black beard trimmed just enough to suggest intention rather than care. His hair was long, pulled back at the nape, streaked with gray that caught the sun. He wore a dark vest over a dust-colored shirt, sleeves rolled to reveal forearms marked by old scars and fresh confidence. A gun belt rested low on his hips, polished and familiar, like an extension of his body. This was Silas Boone. He carried himself with the ease of a man who expected the world to move aside. His eyes were pale blue, cold and attentive, missing nothing. When he smiled, it was not warmth that spread across his face, but calculation. Behind him stood 2 others. One was thin and angular, perhaps 30, with sharp features and restless eyes that darted between Ethan and the cabin interior. His clothes were worn but clean, his expression eager in a way that suggested he enjoyed conflict more than he understood it. The other man was broader, heavier, with a sunburned face and a thick mustache drooping over a mouth set permanently into a scowl. He moved less, watched more, his hand resting casually near his weapon. Silas's gaze slid past Ethan into the cabin. "There you are," he said softly, spotting Lydia. "I was beginning to think you'd found yourself a new hiding place." Ethan stepped fully into the doorway. "This is private property," he said. "You're trespassing." Silas's attention shifted to him, assessing. He took a moment, as if savoring the evaluation. "You must be the buyer," he said. "Ethan Crowley. Heard you came into town this morning." Ethan did not ask how he knew. In places like Red Willow, information société traveled faster than people admitted. "That woman behind you," Silas continued, nodding toward Lydia without looking away from Ethan, "is my wife. She's coming home with me." Lydia's voice cut through the air, steady but firm. "I'm not your wife." Silas chuckled quietly, the sound dry. "We've been through this," he said. "You don't get to rewrite facts just because you don't like them." The thin man shifted his weight, eyes gleaming. "Boss," he said. "Want me to—" Silas raised a hand, silencing him without turning. "Not yet." Ethan felt something settle inside him, heavy and resolute. "She says she doesn't want to go," he said. "That should be enough." Silas's smile widened slightly. "You new around here, Crowley? Out here, what matters isn't what someone wants, it's what belongs to who." The word hung in the air, ugly and deliberate. Lydia stepped forward before Ethan could stop her. "You forced my father to sign those papers," she said. "You know they weren't legal." Silas's eyes flicked to her, hardening. "Your father owed me money. I gave him a way out. You agreed." "I was 19, Lydia said. "And he was dying." For a brief moment, something unreadable crossed Silas's face. Then it vanished. "People make sacrifices," he said. "It's how the world works." Ethan felt the heat rise in his chest, sharper than anger, colder than rage. He had heard that justification before, spoken by men who stood far from the consequences of their choices. "You need to leave," Ethan said. "Now." Silas laughed openly this time. "You don't understand," he said. "I don't leave without what's mine." He gestured subtly, and the heavy-set man moved toward the cabin's side wall, glancing at the chimney. The thin man stepped closer to the porch rail, his hand now openly gripping his gun. Lydia's breath hitched. Ethan felt it before he saw it, the way her posture shifted, protective, instinctive. His gaze followed the movement of her hand, briefly pressing against her abdomen, and understanding settled over him with sudden clarity. Silas noticed too. His eyes narrowed. "Is that so?" he said slowly. "You didn't mention that." Lydia lifted her chin. "It's not yours." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Silas's jaw tightened, muscle jumping beneath his beard. "Everything about you is mine," he said, "including whatever you're carrying." Ethan's hand clenched at his side. He thought of his son, of the way small lives depended on the mercy of larger ones. He thought of the mine supervisor who had said, "Accidents happen," and walked away clean. "This ends here," Ethan said. "You take your men and you leave." Silas studied him, really studied him now. "You got a gun, Crowley?" "Yes." "You willing to use it?" Ethan met his gaze. "If I have to." Silas smiled, and there was something almost pleased in it. "Good," he said. "I respect a man who knows what he's willing to lose." He turned slightly, glancing back at the thin man. "Bring the lantern." Lydia gasped. "No," Silas shrugged. "If she won't come home, maybe the house shouldn't stand." The thin man moved toward the horses, retrieving a metal lantern still warm from travel. Ethan felt something snap, not loudly, not violently, but cleanly, like a rope pulled too far. "Enough," Ethan said. Silas stopped, turning back. "You want to make this about you?" he asked. "Fine." He stepped off the porch, boots striking dirt, and motioned with his head toward the clearing by the creek. "One gun," he said. "You and me. Settle it." Lydia shook her head, fear flashing openly now. "Ethan, don't." Silas's eyes gleamed. "You win, I walk away. She's free. I don't come back." "And if you win?" Ethan asked. Silas's smile returned, thin and certain. "Then you won't care." The creek rushed louder, as if eager for what was coming. Ethan glanced back at Lydia. He saw the strength there, and the fear, and the quiet plea she hadn't voiced. He thought of the cabin, of the smoke rising that morning like a promise. "All right," he said. Silas's grin widened. "Good." The men began to move, clearing space. Lydia reached for Ethan's sleeve, her fingers trembling. "He's faster than he looks," she whispered. "He's killed before." Ethan covered her hand briefly with his own. "So have accidents," he said softly. They stepped toward the clearing, the sun blazing overhead, the creek flashing beside them. And as Ethan walked, he understood that whatever happened next would not end quietly. The clearing by Red Willow Creek was a rough oval of trampled grass and stone, baked hard by weeks of relentless sun. Heat shimmered just above the ground, distorting the edges of things, making distance unreliable. Ethan stepped into it with measured calm, boots sinking slightly where the soil still held moisture from the creek's overflow. Across from him, Silas Boone moved with an easy confidence that bordered on arrogance, as if the land itself had already agreed with him. Silas removed his vest and handed it to the thin man, whose name Ethan would later learn was Cole Mercer. Cole was lean to the point of sharpness, his cheekbones cutting deep lines into his narrow face. His hair was light brown and perpetually uncombed, and his eyes carried a restless hunger, the kind born from years of standing behind stronger men and waiting for permission to be cruel. He grinned now, enjoying the spectacle. The heavier man, Jonah Pike, stayed near the porch. He was older than the others, thick through the middle, with a mustache gone gray at the ends, and eyes that rarely revealed what he was thinking. Jonah had once been a ranch hand before a crushed knee ended honest work for him. Since then, he had learned that loyalty to men like Silas paid better than pride. Silas loosened his shoulders and rolled his neck, beard catching the sunlight. "Before we do this," he said, voice steady, "let's make sure the terms are clear." Ethan nodded. He had removed his coat, folding it once and setting it on a nearby rock. Beneath it, he wore a plain work shirt, sleeves rolled to the forearms, scars pale against tanned skin. His movements were economical, lacking any flourish. He had learned long ago that unnecessary motion wasted time and breath. "One shot," Silas continued. "No interference. Winner decides what happens next." "And Lydia walks free," Ethan said. Silas's mouth curved. "If you're standing when it's done." Behind them, Lydia stood near the edge of the trees, her hands clenched together, knuckles white. She had moved without being told, positioning herself where she could see everything. Her face was pale beneath the summer glare, but her eyes were clear, focused. She was no longer pleading. She was watching, memorizing, preparing for whatever came after. The creek rushed on, indifferent. Silas turned sideways, marking off distance with his heel. 20 paces, he said. "Turn on 3. Ethan did not argue. He walked his steps carefully, counting each one, feeling the rhythm settle into his bones. At the 20th pace, He stopped and turned his back to Silas, the sun hot against his neck. He thought of his son then, not as he had died, but as he had lived. Laughing, running, asking questions that deserved better answers than the world had given. "Ready?" Silas called. Ethan did not respond. He did not need to. "One," Silas said. The air felt thick, heavy with dust and breath. "Two." A cicada screamed somewhere in the trees, loud and sudden. "Three." Ethan turned. Silas was fast, faster than most men Ethan had known. His hand moved with practiced precision, gun clearing leather in a smooth arc. But speed alone did not win fights. Ethan had learned that underground, where timing mattered more than strength. They fired almost simultaneously. The crack of gunfire tore through the clearing, echoing off the canyon walls. Ethan felt the recoil jolt his arm, smelled the sharp bite of powder. Silas staggered back a step, surprise flashing across his face as his shot went wide, splintering bark from a pine behind Ethan. Silas's bullet had missed, Ethan's had not. The impact struck Silas high in the chest, spinning him slightly before he dropped to one knee. He gasped, one hand clawing at his vest, eyes wide not with pain, but disbelief. Blood spread quickly, dark against the dust. For a moment, no one moved. Then Cole Mercer swore and reached for his gun. "Don't," Ethan said sharply, leveling his weapon. Cole hesitated, eyes flicking to Jonah. Jonah raised his hands slowly, palms out. "Boss said fair fight," he muttered, "and he lost." Silas collapsed forward, face first into the dirt. The heat pressed down harder, as if the sun itself were leaning in to see the end. Lydia rushed forward before anyone could stop her. She knelt beside Silas, not to comfort him, but to confirm what she already knew. She did not touch him. She simply looked, then stood. "It's over," she said quietly. Cole's face twisted with anger and fear. "You killed him," he snapped at Ethan. "You think that ends it?" Ethan kept his gun trained on him. "It ends this." A new sound cut through the tension then, the slow, uneven clink of metal accompanied by a low, wheezing bark. From the tree line emerged an old hound, ribs visible beneath patchy brown fur, one ear torn and scarred. The dog moved stiffly, favoring a hind leg, tail wagging uncertainly. Behind it came a man. He was elderly, bent at the shoulders, with a long white beard that reached nearly to his chest. His hat was sun-bleached and misshapen, and his clothes hung loosely on a frame thinned by age. His eyes, however, were sharp and curious, missing little. "Afternoon," the man said mildly. "Sounded like trouble." Lydia recognized him immediately. "Mr. Harlan," she said, "you shouldn't be out in this heat." Eli Harlan smiled faintly. He was a prospector who lived farther up the ridge, known in Red Willow for minding his own business and surviving longer than anyone expected. "Heat doesn't bother me," he said. "Noise does." His dog sniffed at Silas's body, then sneezed and sat down. Jonah exhaled slowly. "Eli," he said, "didn't know you were this close." "I wasn't," Eli replied, "until I heard shooting." Cole backed toward the horses. "This isn't over," he said, voice shaking. "People will come." "Let them," Ethan said. Cole mounted quickly and rode hard down the trail, dust rising in his wake. Jonah followed more slowly, casting one last look at Silas before leaving. The clearing fell quiet again. Eli Harlan studied Ethan for a long moment. "You know," he said, "Silas Boone had a way of ending up dead. Just figured it'd be someone else." Lydia let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The sun dipped slightly, shadows lengthening as afternoon wore on. The heat began to ease, replaced by the faint promise of evening cool. Ethan lowered his gun and felt the weight of what had happened settle fully. It was over, but not finished. The body stayed where it fell. No one suggested moving it. In places like Red Willow, death was not hurried away. It was acknowledged, measured, and then dealt with when the living were ready. Silas Boone lay face down in the dust near the creek, his dark beard matted with blood and grit, one arm bent at an unnatural angle beneath him. The heat no longer bothered him. The land had taken him back without ceremony. Ethan stood a few steps away, gun lowered but not holstered. The weight in his chest was not triumph. It was something denser, final. He had not come to Red Willow to kill a man, but neither did he regret the outcome. Regret was a luxury for people whose choices had alternatives. Lydia remained near the trees, arms wrapped around herself now that the immediate danger had passed. The tension she had held so tightly finally began to loosen, and with it came a visible tremor. Her strength had not left her, but it had shifted, settling into exhaustion. She watched Ethan with a look he could not yet name, gratitude mixed with something more cautious, as if she were still waiting for the ground to give way. Eli Harlan cleared his throat. The sound was dry and rasping, like wind over gravel. He leaned more heavily on his walking stick, the old hound sitting faithfully at his feet. The dog's name, Ethan would learn later, was Bristle, a name earned honestly. Bristle's muzzle was white with age, his cloudy eyes tracking movement more by sound and habit than sight. He had followed Eli through 2 decades of solitude, and his loyalty was as stubborn as his limp. "Well," Eli said, glancing from the body to the creek and back again, "this won't stay quiet." Ethan nodded. "I know." Lydia took a step forward. "Cole Mercer rode for help," she said. "He won't stop until he finds someone willing to listen." Eli gave a humorless snort. "Plenty of folks listened to Silas Boone when he was breathing. Some of them still will." That truth settled heavily among them. Ethan crouched beside Silas's body, careful, methodical. He searched the man not out of malice, but necessity. From the inside pocket of Silas's vest, he removed a worn leather wallet, thick with folded papers. Most were land agreements, crude maps, debt notes signed with shaking hands. One paper stood out, creased differently, handled more often. Ethan unfolded it and frowned. Lydia leaned closer, her breath catching. "That's my father's handwriting," she said. "Those are the terms he was forced to sign." Ethan handed it to her. The ink was uneven, the pressure heavy, as if the pen itself had resisted. Dates, amounts, threats thinly veiled as promises. Proof, if anyone were willing to see it. "There's more," Ethan said quietly. He reached again and found a small key on a chain. It was old, iron, the kind used for strong boxes. Eli's eyes sharpened. "Silas kept a lockbox," Eli said, "down by the old logging shed near the canyon bend. He never trusted banks." Lydia looked up. "What's in it?" Eli shrugged. "What's always in boxes like that? Secrets, enough to buy silence or justice depending on who opens it." The word justice hung in the air like an unfamiliar language. Ethan straightened. "We need the sheriff." Eli grimaced. "Sheriff Dalton's a careful man," he said. "Careful enough to live a long time next to men like Silas. That cuts both ways." Lydia's jaw set. "If we wait, Cole will poison the story." "He already has," Ethan said. They worked together then, not as allies born of trust, but of necessity. Ethan and Eli dragged Silas's body into the shade, covering it with a canvas from the porch. Lydia fetched water, her movement slow but steady, though her hands shook when she thought no one was watching. As the sun dipped lower, the heat broke slightly. Evening crept in, carrying the cool breath of the creek. The cicadas fell silent, replaced by the chirring of insects waking for the night. Shadows lengthened, softening the harsh lines of the land. It was Eli who spotted the dust first. "Company," he said. 2 riders approached from the south, slower than Silas's men had come. When they drew close enough, Ethan recognized the lead man by his posture alone. Sheriff Nathan Dalton rode like someone who had spent his life balancing caution and responsibility. He was in his early 50s, lean and tall, with a graying mustache and eyes that missed very little. His uniform was clean but worn, star-dulled by years of use rather than neglect. He dismounted carefully, gaze moving from Ethan to Lydia, then to the covered shape by the creek. Behind him was Deputy Aaron Cole, younger, broader, with a square jaw and earnest eyes. He looked nervous, hand hovering near his belt, not yet sure which side of the situation required force. Dalton spoke first. "Mr. Crowley," he said. "Heard shots." Ethan nodded. "Silas Boone challenged me to a duel. I accepted." Dalton's eyes narrowed slightly. "And the result?" Ethan gestured toward the canvas. Dalton exhaled slowly, then turned to Lydia. "Miss Hale," he said. "Silas reported you missing, said you'd been taken." "I ran," Lydia replied evenly. "From him." Dalton studied her face, the bruise on her wrist, the papers she still clutched. He did not interrupt. Eli stepped forward. "I witnessed the duel," he said. "Fair terms, no interference." Dalton nodded once. "I know your word, Eli." That acknowledgement mattered more than it sounded. Dalton knelt by the body, uncovering Silas's face. He closed the man's eyes with practiced care. "This won't end clean," he said, "but it'll end truer than most things around here." He stood and met Ethan's gaze. "You'll need to come into town tomorrow, both of you. Statements." "We'll be there," Ethan said. As the sheriff prepared to leave, Dalton paused. "Crowley," he added quietly, "be ready." Silas Boone had long shadows. The riders departed, dust settling behind them. Night fell fully then. The temperature dropped just enough to raise goose flesh. Ethan built a fire while Lydia prepared what little food she had left. They ate in silence. Bristle curled near the hearth, Eli dozing in his chair like a man content to let others carry the night. Later, when the fire burned low, Lydia spoke. "Thank you," she said simply. Ethan looked at her, seeing not just a woman in trouble, but one standing at the edge of a future she had not yet claimed. "We're not done," he replied, "but we're closer." Outside, the creek continued its endless work, carrying away blood, dust, and the day's violence. The cabin stood quiet under the stars, no longer just a place Ethan had bought, but a place that had chosen him back. Morning came slowly to the cabin, not with warmth, but with clarity. The sun rose over the ridge in pale bands of gold, slipping between the pines and laying long, quiet lines across the porch. The heat would return soon. Red Willow never spared anyone for long, but for now the air held a fragile coolness, enough to remind Ethan that night had passed and left consequences behind. Ethan woke before the others. Sleep had come in fragments, broken by memory and the constant awareness that nothing about his life was simple anymore. He stepped outside barefoot, the wooden boards cold beneath his feet, and watched the creek carry yesterday downstream. Blood did not stain the water now. Dust had settled. Nature had already begun its quiet erasure. Behind him, Lydia emerged from the cabin doorway. She moved more slowly this morning, one hand resting against the small of her back as she adjusted to the weight she carried. In the daylight, the signs were clearer, the looseness of her dress, the careful way she shifted her balance. She looked tired, but there was something steadier in her eyes than the night before, as if survival had finally loosened its grip enough to allow resolve in its place. Ethan turned. "You should sit," he said. "I've been sitting my whole life," Lydia replied gently. "I'd rather stand while I can." They shared a brief, quiet smile, one born not of humor, but understanding. Eli Harlan was already awake as well, crouched near the fire pit, feeding it kindling with deliberate patience. Bristle lay nearby, chin on his paws, tail thumping faintly when he noticed Ethan. The dog was old, likely 13 or 14, his joints stiff, but his presence grounding. Eli spoke without looking up. "Sheriff Dalton will come back today," he said, "and he won't come alone." Ethan nodded. "Cole Mercer won't stay quiet." "No," Eli agreed. "Men like him don't." The sound of approaching horses reached them before the riders came into view. This time there was no urgency, no reckless speed. Authority announced itself differently. Sheriff Dalton rode at the front, his posture straight, eyes alert beneath the brim of his hat. Beside him was a man Ethan did not recognize, taller, broader, dressed in a dark coat despite the rising heat. They dismounted together. The newcomer was in his early 40s, with close-cropped hair and a trimmed beard that suggested discipline rather than vanity. His eyes were sharp, intelligent, taking in the cabin, the creek, the people. He carried himself like someone accustomed to listening more than speaking. "Mr. Crowley," Dalton said. "Miss Hale, this is Thomas Reed." Reed extended a hand. "Territorial investigator," he said. His grip was firm, his voice even. "I've been following Silas Boone's operations for the better part of a year." That statement landed heavily. Lydia's breath caught. "Then you know what he did." "I know pieces," Reed replied. "Enough to suspect more." Dalton gestured toward the cabin. "We'll talk inside." They gathered around the table where Lydia spread the papers recovered from Silas's vest. Reed studied them carefully, brow furrowing deeper with each page. "These aren't marriage documents," he said finally. "They're leverage, plain and simple." Lydia swallowed. "Does that mean I'm free?" Reed met her gaze. "It means Silas Boone never legally owned you, not on paper, not anywhere." The words seemed to drain the air from the room. Lydia closed her eyes briefly, one hand pressing to her abdomen, steadying herself. Ethan watched her carefully. Freedom, he knew, could be as frightening as captivity when it arrived too suddenly. "There's more," Reed continued. "Silas wasn't just extorting families. He was consolidating land near the canyon, water rights, timber access. Anyone who resisted lost something." Ethan's chest tightened. "My son died in a mine collapse," he said quietly. "Owned by a subsidiary Boone financed." Reed looked at him sharply. "Then you should see this." From his satchel, Reed removed a folded map and several ledgers. The map showed marked properties, mines, ranches, forest plots, all connected by a pattern too deliberate to ignore. "Silas Boone's reach went further than Red Willow," Reed said. "And now that he's dead, the people who benefited from him will want what he left behind." Dalton shifted uneasily. "Meaning trouble." "Meaning danger," Reed corrected, as if summoned by the word. Shouting echoed from down the trail. Cole Mercer rode into the clearing hard, dust flying. His face was flushed, eyes wild, gun strapped openly at his side. Behind him followed two unfamiliar men, locals by their dress, nervous and uncertain, armed more from fear than conviction. "There they are," Cole shouted. "Murderers hiding behind papers." Dalton stepped forward immediately, hand raised. "That's enough, Cole." Cole reined in, breathing hard. "Silas Boone was a good man," he said, though the words lacked conviction. "He didn't deserve this." Reed moved beside Dalton, calm and immovable. "He deserved justice," he said, "and he was overdue." Cole laughed bitterly. "Justice?" He spat into the dirt. "You think folks around here care about justice? They care about who keeps the lights on." Ethan felt Lydia tense beside him. He stepped slightly in front of her without thinking. Dalton's voice hardened. "This is over, Cole. You'll stand down." For a moment, it seemed Cole might refuse. Then his shoulders sagged. The fight drained out of him, replaced by something smaller, fear of being on the wrong side of history. He turned his horse away. The others followed. Silence returned, heavy but different now. Reed exhaled. "That was restraint," he said to Dalton. "Not everyone will show it." "What happens now?" Lydia asked Reed, considered her. "Now we build a case, and we protect you until it's finished." Ethan looked around the cabin, the creek, the land he had bought to disappear into. "She stays here," he said. "If she wants." Lydia looked at him, surprised. Then she nodded. "I do." As the sun climbed higher, the heat returned, pressing down on Red Willow with familiar insistence. But inside the cabin, something fundamental had shifted. The truth was no longer buried. It had weight now, and direction. Ethan stepped outside once more, watching the light change on the water. He didn't know what the future held, only that it would not be quiet and it would not be easy. But for the first time in years, it would be honest. The cabin did not return to normal after the truth came out. It adjusted instead, like a body learning to live around an old injury. Days passed, and with them came routines shaped by caution rather than comfort. Ethan rose before dawn, checked the perimeter, walked the creek line, and watched the ridge until the sun climbed high enough to burn away shadows. Lydia helped where she could, though Ethan noticed how he began to quietly take on the heavier tasks without ever mentioning it. Neither of them spoke about that change. Some things did not need names. The heat returned in full force by late morning, thick and relentless. Cicadas screamed from the trees, and the air smelled of sap and dust. By afternoon, the cabin seemed to hold its breath. It was during one of those afternoons that trouble returned, not with horses or shouting, but with paper. Thomas Reed arrived alone this time, riding a chestnut mare that moved with patient confidence. Reed dismounted slowly, his posture more tired than before. His dark coat was gone, replaced by a rolled-sleeve shirt and suspenders dusted from travel. He looked less like an official now, and more like a man who had spent too long knocking on doors that didn't open. "I won't stay long," Reed said as Ethan met him on the porch. "But what I have can't wait." They sat at the table while Lydia poured water. Reed laid out a thin stack of documents, deeds, mining records, handwritten correspondence. His fingers lingered on one envelope longer than the others. "These came from Silas Boone's lockbox," Reed said, "hidden beneath false ledgers. I didn't expect what I found." Ethan leaned in. "What is it?" Reed slid the envelope across the table. Inside was a folded letter, brittle with age. The handwriting was careful, deliberate. Ethan recognized it instantly, his breath caught. "It's from my son," he said quietly. Lydia's hand went to her mouth. Reed nodded. He wrote it 6 months before the collapse, addressed to a safety inspector who never filed it. Ethan unfolded the letter with trembling hands. The words were calm, professional, devastating. His son had documented unsafe conditions, falsified reports, pressure from management to keep quiet. At the bottom was a name, Silas Boone. The room felt smaller as the truth settled into place. This was not just negligence, it was erasure. "He tried to stop it," Ethan said, "and they buried him for it." Lydia reached across the table and rested her hand over Ethan's. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Reed cleared his throat. "This letter changes everything," he said, "but it also puts you both at risk." As if summoned by the warning, a sound drifted in through the open window, a low growl. Bristle was on his feet, body tense, ears pricked toward the trees. Eli Harlan appeared in the doorway moments later, rifle in hand, eyes narrowed. "Someone's watching," Eli said. "Has been since yesterday." They moved quickly then, not in panic, but in practice. Ethan circled wide, eyes scanning the ridge. Lydia stayed inside, steadying herself against the table, one hand pressed to her belly as the other gripped the rifle Eli had taught her to use days earlier. The watcher revealed himself at last near the tree line, a man alone, thin but tall, dressed in a city coat ill-suited for the heat. He raised his hand slowly as Ethan approached. "My name's Walter Briggs," the man said. He was in his late 50s, hair thinning, beard trimmed close. His eyes were tired rather than hostile. "I worked for Boone." "Why are you here?" Ethan asked. Briggs swallowed. "Because I'm done running." They brought him inside under Eli's watchful eye. Briggs sat heavily, wiping sweat from his brow. "I kept records," Briggs said. "For years. Boone paid me to destroy them. I didn't." Reed stiffened. "You're a bookkeeper." Briggs nodded. "And a coward, but not enough to die with lies." He produced a leather-bound notebook from his coat. Inside were accounts, dates, payments, names of men who had benefited from Boone's empire. "This goes higher," Briggs said. "Way higher." Silence followed, the kind that reshaped futures. Night fell again, cooler this time, wind whispering through the pines. Lydia stood on the porch later, watching stars emerge one by one. Ethan joined her. "He tried to tell the truth," she said softly. "Your son." "He did," Ethan replied. "And now, so will we." Inside, Reed and Eli spoke in low voices, planning next steps. Bristle slept by the fire, twitching as if chasing younger days. Lydia turned to Ethan. "If this gets worse—" "It will," Ethan said. She nodded. "Then we face it." The creek continued to run, carrying old sins downstream, but the lines had been drawn now, and some could not be unseen. The valley did not erupt all at once. It murmured first. News traveled through Red Willow the way wind moved through dry grass, uneven, whispering, changing shape with every mouth it passed. By the third morning after Walter Briggs arrived at the cabin, people were talking openly. Not loudly, not yet. But doors stayed open longer than usual, and eyes followed strangers with sharper interest. Truth had begun to loosen old fears, and fear never let go without a struggle. Ethan noticed the change when he rode into town with Thomas Reed. The feed store fell quiet when they entered. A pair of men at the counter stopped mid-sentence. No one reached for a weapon, but the air carried tension, thick as heat. Red Willow had lived too long under Silas Boone's shadow to trust that daylight meant safety. They met at the courthouse, a squat wooden building that leaned slightly to the east, as if it had grown tired of standing straight. Inside waited Judge Margaret Hale, Lydia's aunt, though few people used that connection aloud. Margaret Hale was in her early 60s, tall, with iron-gray hair pinned back so tightly it pulled the skin at her temples smooth. Her face bore the lines of a woman who had chosen principle over comfort more times than she could count. She had once been softer, Ethan learned later, before the valley taught her what compromise cost. Margaret listened without interruption as Reed laid out the evidence, the letter, the ledgers, the land seizures, the coerced marriages, the falsified safety reports. Her hands remained folded on the desk, knuckles pale, eyes fixed on Reed's face. When he finished, she said nothing for a long moment. Finally, she spoke. Issue the warrants." The words carried weight far beyond the room. By afternoon, deputies rode out across the valley. Men who had once laughed beside Silas Boone found themselves answering questions they had avoided for years. Some resisted. Most did not. Fear had shifted directions. Back at the cabin, Lydia felt it before she saw it. The baby kicked hard, sudden and insistent, as if responding to the change in the world. She laughed softly in surprise, one hand pressed to her stomach, the other gripping the porch rail. "He's strong," she said. Ethan smiled, the expression unfamiliar but real. "He's impatient." That evening, Eli Harlan returned from town with news and another guest. The man who followed him up the trail was younger than Eli, but not by much, mid-40s perhaps, with sun-darkened skin and a thick black beard flecked with gray. His shoulders were broad, his posture guarded. He introduced himself as Samuel Ortiz. Ortiz had once worked the mines as a foreman before walking away after a cave-in took 3 men under his watch. The guilt had carved deep lines into his face and left him wary of authority. He spoke carefully, measuring each word. "I heard what you're doing," Ortiz said to Ethan. "I buried too many men who should have gone home. I can testify." He wasn't the last. By the end of the week, others came. A widow with trembling hands, a rancher missing 2 fingers, a teacher whose school funding vanished after she refused to sell land. They did not stay long. They came to be seen, to be counted. The cabin became something else then. Not a refuge, but a witness. The danger came at dusk on the 7th day. Ethan heard it first, the distant engine of a truck climbing the old logging road. It did not belong. Vehicles rarely ventured that far. Bristle rose with a low growl, stiff-legged and alert. Lydia was inside, writing names and dates beside Reed, her face calm but pale. 2 trucks burst into the clearing, dust choking the air. 4 men jumped out, armed and angry. At their center stood Cole Mercer. He looked different now, thinner, desperate. His eyes darted too quickly, and sweat soaked his collar despite the cooling air. Power had abandoned him, and men like Cole never forgave that. "You think you've won?" he shouted. "You think papers change blood?" Ethan stepped forward, rifle steady. Eli and Ortiz flanked him. Reed remained behind Lydia, hand near his sidearm. "This ends tonight," Cole said. "You hand over the evidence or this place burns." For a moment, no one spoke. Then a voice rose from the trees. "Enough!" Sheriff Dalton emerged with 6 deputies behind him, weapons drawn, expressions grim. He had aged a decade in a week, but his eyes were clear. "Drop them," Dalton said. Cole laughed, sharp and hysterical. "You're too late." A gunshot cracked the air, not from the clearing, but from the ridge above. Cole jerked sideways, collapsing to his knees, screaming as his shoulder bloomed red. His men froze. From the ridge stepped Judge Margaret Hale, rifle braced against her shoulder. She lowered it slowly, expression unflinching. "I warned you," she said. The rest happened quickly. Deputies moved in. Guns were kicked away. Hands went up. As Cole was dragged past Lydia, his eyes met hers. There was no hatred left in them, only fear. That night, the valley finally exhaled. Weeks passed. Trials followed. Names fell. Land returned to families who had forgotten what ownership felt like. The mine was closed. Investigations spread beyond Red Willow. One evening, as the heat finally broke for good and autumn hinted at its arrival, Ethan and Lydia sat on the porch watching fireflies gather near the creek. "I never thought I'd stay," Lydia said, "or that I'd want to." Ethan nodded. "I never thought I'd belong anywhere again." The baby shifted, strong and certain. Below them, the valley lay quiet, not silent, but listening. For the first time in years, it was listening to its own people. Autumn arrived without ceremony. One morning, the heat simply loosened its grip, and the valley breathed again. The air over Red Willow Creek carried a clean sharpness now, scented with pine needles and distant frost. Leaves along the ridge began to yellow at the edges, not yet ready to fall, but aware that their time was changing. The land had endured another reckoning, and like it always did, it adapted. So did the cabin. It no longer felt like a place borrowed from desperation. The porch rail had been repaired. The loose shutter no longer rattled in the evening wind. Inside, the table bore marks of use. Ink stains, knife nicks, a faint ring where a cup had been set down too many times. Life had taken hold in quiet, persistent ways. Ethan Crowley stood at the edge of the clearing one morning, splitting wood with steady rhythm. His movements were slower than before, not from weakness, but from deliberation. Grief no longer drove him like a lash at his back. It walked beside him now, familiar and manageable. The valley had not given him his son back, but it had returned something else he thought lost forever. Direction. Behind him, Lydia watched from the porch, one hand resting on the curve of her belly, now unmistakable. Pregnancy had softened her slightly without dulling her strength. Her auburn hair was tied back loosely, strands escaping to frame her face. There was color in her cheeks again, and the guarded tension she once carried had eased into something steadier, alert, but no longer afraid. Bristle lay nearby in a patch of sun, ribs rising and falling slowly. Age had not left him much speed, but it had given him patience. He lifted his head when Lydia stepped down the porch stairs, tail thumping once against the ground. "Careful," Ethan said, setting the axe aside. "You don't have to do everything." Lydia smiled faintly. "I know. I just like knowing I still can." They walked together toward the creek, where the water ran clearer than Ethan had ever seen it. Silt from illegal runoff had finally settled since the mine's closure. Fish had begun to return, small signs, easily missed by those not looking for them. The trial had concluded weeks earlier. It was not dramatic. There were no speeches worth remembering. Justice, when it finally arrived, did so with paperwork, testimony, and long days that ground men down rather than striking them down. Several names fell. Others fled. Land titles were restored. Funds were allocated to families who had buried their dead without answers. Silas Boone's empire dissolved not with fire, but with exposure. Thomas Reed left shortly after, his work complete. Before he went, he shook Ethan's hand with rare warmth. "Most men would have walked away," he said. "You didn't?" Ethan hadn't known how to answer then. He still wasn't sure he did now. Eli Harlan moved farther up the ridge before winter, returning to his preferred solitude. He stopped by the cabin one last time, leaving behind a crate of preserved food and a spare blanket. "Just in case," he'd said gruffly, avoiding Lydia's eyes. Bristle watched him go for a long time before settling back down, as if understanding that some friendships didn't require proximity. Judge Margaret Hale visited once, unannounced. She walked the porch slowly, hands clasped behind her back, eyes taking in the repaired cabin and the valley beyond. "You did good here," she told Ethan. "Both of you." When she left, Lydia stood quietly for a long time, absorbing the weight of a family she had nearly lost and a future she had almost been denied. The baby came early on a night when the first frost crept into the low places. Wind whispered through the trees, and the cabin glowed warm against the dark. Lydia labored with clenched determination, refusing panic, breathing through each wave of pain with a strength that left Ethan in awe. There was no doctor within miles, only Eli's old medical kit and instructions Lydia had memorized long before she ever needed them. When the child finally cried, sharp and insistent, Ethan felt something inside him break open. It was a boy. Small, red-faced, furious at the world for forcing him into it. Lydia laughed weakly, tears streaking her face as she pulled him close. The moment stretched, fragile and perfect. "What will you name him?" Ethan asked quietly. Lydia looked down at the child, then up at him. "I was thinking, Caleb." Ethan nodded. "It suits him." Caleb grew quickly. Winter came and went, softer than usual. The cabin endured its first snowfall as a home rather than a shelter. Ethan learned the rhythms of fatherhood again, not as a replacement, but as a continuation. He didn't pretend the ache was gone. It never would be. But it no longer defined him. Lydia found her footing too. She began teaching again in the spring, holding classes in the old schoolhouse that reopened with new funding. Her voice carried confidence now, not defiance. Children listened. Sometimes, in the evenings, Ethan would sit on the porch with Caleb sleeping against his chest while Lydia graded papers beside him. They spoke of ordinary things, weather, crops, repairs. The extraordinary no longer demanded constant attention. One night, as summer returned gently this time, Lydia broke the silence. "I never thanked you properly," she said. Ethan shook his head. "You don't owe me anything." She studied him for a long moment. "I know. That's why I'm still here." He understood then that some choices were not debts, but commitments freely made. The valley settled, not into forgetfulness, but into memory shaped by truth. Red Willow would never be innocent. No place ever was. but it had learned something essential, that silence was not safety, and that even the smallest voices could change the course of things when they refused to be buried. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge and the creek caught fire with reflected light, Ethan stood beside Lydia and watched Caleb take his first unsteady steps across the porch. He stumbled. He laughed. He tried again. Ethan felt his chest tighten, not with grief, but with gratitude. Some lives were not rebuilt. They were continued. And some houses, bought in desperation, became something far rarer. They became places that stayed. Sometimes, God doesn't answer our prayers with thunder or miracles we can see from a distance. Sometimes, He answers them quietly, through a stranger who chooses to stay, a door that opens when all others are closed, or a small life that arrives at just the right moment. Ethan thought he was buying a house, but God gave him a family. Lydia thought she was running from fear, but God was leading her towards safety. And a child who was never meant to be owned was born into a world that finally chose courage over silence. In our own lives, we may feel forgotten, tired, or convinced that our best days are behind us. But the truth is this: God is still working in places the world has given up on, in quiet homes, in broken hearts, in people who think they are starting over too late. If this story touched your heart, let it remind you that no pain is wasted, no prayer is ignored, and no life is too small for God's grace. Please take a moment to share this story with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We read every single one. And if you believe, like we do, that love, faith, and compassion can still change the world, subscribe to this channel so we can continue telling stories that heal instead of harm. May God bless you. May He protect your home, your children, and every animal placed in your care. And may you never walk through fear alone. Thank you for being here.